Delete all of it. That's a command, not a request, Dr. Sylvia said, her index finger jabbing at my computer monitor, where 8 months of meticulously collected data glowed back at us. The laboratory had emptied hours ago, and only the hum of equipment filled the silence between her words. I looked at my research, thousands of hours tracking the Azurian butterfly's migration patterns through the Viridia forest, countless nights spent in makeshift tents, days wading through swamps, and weeks analyzing minute wing movements, all captured in charts, graphs, and field notes. This research isn't conclusive, she continued, though we both knew that was a lie. The migration patterns you've recorded don't meet scientific standards. The board agrees it's best to start fresh. I pulled my laptop closer, angling the screen so she could watch. As you wish, I said, opening the main database. I selected all files, folders, and backups related to Project Azurian. With one click, I initiated the deletion. The progress bar crept forward as my supervisor's reflection in the screen showed the faintest smile. What she couldn't see was what else I had programmed to happen when those specific files were deleted, something that would make sure the truth couldn't be buried as easily as my research. Before I continue this story, if you're enjoying this so far, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more incredible stories like this one. Your support means everything to creators like me who spend hours crafting these real-life tales of revenge and justice. Drop a comment about what you think Sylvia doesn't know yet. Now, let's get back to what happened next. My name is Nadia, and until 3 weeks ago, I was a wildlife biologist specializing in endangered butterfly species. I'd spent my entire career believing science could protect what mattered. That data spoke louder than dollars. That belief died the moment I discovered why my supervisor wanted my research gone. I joined the Ecological Research Division of the Natural Sciences Institute 9 months ago, thrilled to be studying the mysterious Azurian butterfly, a species so rare, most researchers never encountered one in their lifetime. Their wings shimmered with an electric blue that seemed to pulse in sunlight, making them almost appear to glow against the deep green of the Viridia forest canopy. Your tracking methods are revolutionary, Doctor, Sylvia had told me during my interview. We need innovative thinking like yours if we're going to save these creatures before development swallows their habitat. I believed her. I believed in the mission. I turned down 2 higher-paying positions to work under her guidance, convinced we shared the same passion for conservation. The first 6 months were everything I'd dreamed of. I developed microscopic trackers that could adhere to butterfly wings without affecting flight patterns. I created an algorithm that predicted migration timing based on subtle temperature shifts. I mapped breeding grounds no one had identified before. This could redefine how we establish conservation boundaries, Dr. Sylvia said when I presented my preliminary findings. She stood in our field station, rain pounding the metal roof, nodding with apparent pride at my work. My dedication came at a personal cost. Travis, my boyfriend of 3 years, left after I postponed our vacation for the 4th time. My apartment collected dust while I lived in the field station. I contracted a tropical illness that left me bedridden for weeks, yet I continued analyzing data from my sickbed. The butterflies don't take vacations, I told Travis during our last conversation. Their entire species hangs by a thread. He didn't understand. How could anyone who hadn't watched an Azurian butterfly emerge from its chrysalis, who hadn't tracked a single specimen across hundreds of miles, marveling at nature's invisible roadmaps? Everything changed when Dr. Sylvia returned from a 2-week absence. She'd attended what she called stakeholder meetings regarding future funding. The woman who stepped back into our laboratory was subtly different. Her enthusiasm for my discoveries had cooled. "We need to revisit your conclusions," she announced, scrolling through my latest migration maps. "These patterns seem statistically insignificant when we adjust for normal variance." I was stunned. Normal variance? We have 3 seasons of data showing these aren't random movements. The Azurians return to these exact coordinates each mating season. She tapped a manicured nail against the monitor. "Science requires skepticism, Nadia. Your attachment to these insects is clouding your judgment." That night, I stayed late, reviewing my methodology. Had I made an error? Had confirmation bias led me astray? I pulled up satellite images of the breeding grounds I'd identified, an undisturbed section of the Viridia forest marked by a distinctive curve in the river. As I zoomed out, I noticed something new: survey markers, digital tags for property assessment. Curious, I searched public records for the parcel. The land had been purchased 8 months ago by Emerald Horizons Development, with plans submitted for a luxury eco-resort called Azure Retreat. The name struck me as odd. Azure, like the Azurian butterflies, no one knew existed there. I dug deeper. Emerald Horizons had submitted an environmental impact statement claiming 0 endangered species in the development zone. Their CEO was listed as Terrence Mitchell, Dr. Sylvia's husband. My hands trembled as I connected the dots. The breeding grounds I'd discovered sat precisely where they planned to build the resort's main attraction, a series of glass-bottomed pools extending over the river canyon. The next morning, my keycard wouldn't work. System error, the security guard explained with a shrug. I waited 2 hours for it to restore my access. Inside the lab, I discovered someone had been in my workstation. Files were arranged differently. Equipment I needed for verification tests was suddenly out for calibration. Strange timing, I mentioned to Ming, a junior researcher who'd been helping me tag butterflies. Things have been strange since Dr. Sylvia got back, Ming whispered. She's been having closed-door meetings with administration. Budget discussions, she says. That afternoon, I tried accessing the tracking system remotely to confirm my findings. The baseline measurements had been altered. Someone had modified my original data to minimize the butterfly population's significance. I checked my email and found a new message. Budget review meeting, tomorrow, 9 a.m. It was unusual. Mid-project budget reviews weren't standard protocol. I printed key findings, downloaded my raw data to a personal drive, and recalibrated my tracking devices after everyone left. While working, I discovered a message thread on Dr. Sylvia's unlocked computer. She'd been receiving consulting fees from Emerald Horizons, $15,000 per month for environmental advisory services. The next morning, Dr. Sylvia asked me to share my latest findings with the budget committee. As I presented, I noticed their expressions, not confusion or interest, but polite impatience. Thank you, Nadia, Dr. Sylvia interrupted halfway through my explanation of migration patterns. I think we've seen enough to make our decision. The committee chair, a man I'd never met, cleared his throat. Given the inconclusive nature of your findings and budgetary constraints, we're recommending a redirection of resources. Redirection? I asked. Project termination, he clarified. Dr. Sylvia will oversee the proper closure of your research, which led to tonight, my supervisor watching as I deleted my life's most important work. I'm glad you're being reasonable, she said, watching the last file disappear. The committee feels your methodology was problematic. I'll provide a neutral reference for your next position. I closed my laptop. Problematic like falsifying endangered species data to clear construction permits? Her smile vanished. That's a serious accusation with 0 merit. Remember who controls your professional future. Message received, I said, gathering my things. As I reached the door, she added, the Institute requires all research materials to remain on site. That includes field notes and personal observations. I handed over my notebooks without protest, watching her lock them in her cabinet. The Viridia Forest Preservation hearing is next month, I said casually. Will you be testifying about the absence of endangered species? The scientific consensus is clear, she replied coolly. No significant impact has been established. Science is fascinating, I said, lingering in the doorway. Sometimes the tiniest creatures have the most surprising impact on the world around them. Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps. But her confidence quickly returned. Goodbye, Nadia. I suggest focusing on your next career move, rather than dwelling on theoretical butterflies. As I walked to my car, phone in hand, I pulled up the special app I'd created months ago, one that monitored the microscopic trackers attached to hundreds of Azurian butterflies throughout the Viridia Forest. The deletion sequence I'd initiated wasn't just erasing files, it was activating Phase 1. I sat in my car watching the tracker app initialize. Each tiny dot representing an Azurian butterfly pulsed on my screen. When I designed these trackers 6 months ago, I'd added a feature no one knew about, a secondary activation protocol that could change the tracker's behavior. Not harmful to the butterflies, but tremendously useful to me. Phase 1 was data preservation. While Dr. Sylvia watched me delete the Institute's copies, my system was busy transmitting everything to secure servers. But that was just the beginning. I drove home in silence, streetlights casting yellow pools on empty roads. My small apartment felt foreign after spending so little time there. Plants had dried up. Mail overflowed from the basket. I hadn't bothered unpacking the boxes Travis left behind when he moved out 2 months ago. Your butterflies mean more to you than I do, he'd said, standing in the doorway with his suitcase. I don't even recognize who you've become. He was right, in a way. I had changed. The forest had changed me. I remember the first time I saw an Azurian butterfly up close. I was setting up monitoring equipment by the river bend when it landed on my field journal. Its wings, electric blue with intricate black patterns, seemed to pulse with their own inner light. It stayed for nearly 5 minutes, long enough for me to notice the unique pattern on its right wing, a marking that resembled a tiny crescent moon. I named him Apollo, though I knew scientists weren't supposed to name their subjects. For weeks, I tracked Apollo's movements, watching him travel precisely the same route each day, from the flowering trees near the ridge to the water's edge at dusk. When I finally attached a tracker to his wing, I felt like I'd been entrusted with something precious. Apollo led me to the breeding grounds, a hidden clearing where thousands of Azurians gathered in a spectacle few human eyes had witnessed. The sight brought tears to my eyes. Thousands of electric blue wings moving in synchronized waves, like the forest itself was breathing. That discovery changed everything. The breeding grounds weren't just important, they were critical to the species' survival, and they sat directly in the path of Terrence Mitchell's bulldozers. I showered and changed, then opened my laptop to review the full extent of what I'd discovered about Emerald Horizons. Their environmental impact statement claimed extensive surveys had found no endangered species in the development zone, a statement signed off by 3 scientists, including Dr. Sylvia, who was listed as an independent consultant. The plans for Azure Retreat were ambitious: 50 luxury cabins, a main lodge with glass-bottom pools extending over the river canyon, and helicopter pads for guests who preferred not to drive the winding forest roads. The marketing materials boasted about immersive nature experiences, while promising to leave no footprint on the pristine landscape. The irony would be laughable if it wasn't so devastating. I checked the tracker app again. The butterflies were gathering, their movements changing subtly as the new programming took effect. Phase 2 would begin at dawn. Sleep evaded me that night. I kept seeing Dr. Sylvia's satisfied smile as my research disappeared. 8 months of my life, gone with a click. She believed science could be erased as easily as files on a hard drive. She didn't understand that real science lives in the world, not just in our documentation of it. Morning came with gray light filtering through blinds I'd forgotten to close. My phone buzzed with a text from Ming. "They cleaned out your desk already. S is telling everyone you had methodological problems. This isn't right." I replied, "Thank you for letting me know. Be careful." "What are you going to do?" Ming asked. "Watch the butterflies," I wrote back. I made coffee and settled at my kitchen table with my laptop. The tracking app showed increased activity, hundreds of Azurians moving in new patterns, their microscopic trackers now emitting different signals. To the naked eye, nothing would appear unusual about their behavior, but satellites and specialized cameras would tell a different story. At 9:47 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. "Miss Nadia Karai?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "Speaking. This is Zara from the Environmental Protection Agency. We've received some unusual satellite imagery from the Viridia Forest region. Our systems indicate you might have relevant expertise." My heart raced. "What kind of imagery?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss details over the phone. Could you come to our field office? Today, if possible." 2 hours later, I sat in a sparse government office, facing Zara, a stern-looking woman with close-cropped hair and intelligent eyes, and her colleague, a man introduced only as Director Hammond. "These images came through this morning," Zara said, turning her monitor toward me. "Our satellite picked up unusual spectral patterns in the Viridia forest." The screen showed thermal imagery of the forest, and there, in the precise location of the breeding grounds, was a pattern too regular to be natural. Hundreds of heat signatures forming what looked almost like letters. "We've never seen anything like this," Director Hammond said. "The pattern appears to spell out coordinates." I kept my expression neutral. "Fascinating. Have you verified the coordinates?" "They point to what appears to be a clearing in the forest, the same location as these heat signatures." Zara switched to another image. "What's strange is this area was recently surveyed for a development project. The environmental impact statement declared no significant wildlife activity." "Is that so?" I took a sip from the water they'd offered me. "And you called me because?" "Your name appeared in research database queries related to this region." "Something about butterfly migration patterns?" Hammond leaned forward. "Research that apparently was discontinued." I chose my words carefully. I was studying the Azurian butterfly. My project was terminated due to budget constraints. "The Azurian?" Zara's eyebrows rose. That's a critically endangered species. If they're present in this region, any development would require extensive mitigation. If they exist there, I agreed. My former supervisor concluded they don't. Hammond and Zara exchanged glances. Miss Karai, Hammond said, would you be willing to join a field investigation? We're assembling a team to verify these findings. Your expertise would be valuable. When? Tomorrow morning. The Environmental Review Board has suspended the development permits pending investigation. I nodded slowly. I'll be there. That evening, as I packed my field gear, my phone rang again. Dr. Sylvia. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message. Nadia, I've just been contacted by the EPA about some ridiculous claim regarding Azurians in the development zone. I know you're behind this somehow. Whatever you think you're doing, stop now. You're risking your entire career on a vendetta. Call me immediately. I didn't call back. Instead, I checked the tracker app. Phase 2 was proceeding perfectly. The Azurians were forming increasingly complex patterns, visible only to specialized equipment, patterns that would be impossible to dismiss as random movement. At 7 a.m. the next day, I met the EPA team at the forest entrance. To my surprise, Ming was there too. They called me as well, she explained quietly. I told them I assisted with your research. Before I could respond, a black SUV pulled up. Dr. Sylvia stepped out, followed by a tall man in an expensive suit, Terrence Mitchell himself. This is absurd, he announced to no one in particular. We've already conducted thorough environmental assessments. This project has been approved at every level. Director Hammond approached them. Mr. Mitchell, Dr. Sylvia, thank you for joining us. We're investigating new evidence that suggests endangered species may be present in the development zone. What evidence? Dr. Sylvia demanded. Her eyes found me in the group, narrowing dangerously. Based on research that failed peer review? Based on satellite imagery received yesterday, Hammond replied calmly, and heat signature patterns that seem to indicate organized butterfly movement. Terrence Mitchell scoffed. Butterflies don't organize, Director. They're insects. Let's find out, shall we? Hammond gestured toward the trail. We've brought specialized equipment to verify the findings. Our group hiked for 2 hours, following the winding path to the clearing I knew so well. Dr. Sylvia stayed close behind me, occasionally making remarks just loud enough for me to hear. Whatever you think you've done, it won't work. Your career is over after this stunt. No one will believe you over established science. I remained silent, watching the tracker app on my phone. We were getting close. The clearing should be just ahead, and if the butterflies were following their programmed patterns, we stepped into the open space by the river bend. At first glance, it appeared empty, just a beautiful forest clearing with morning sunlight filtering through the canopy. Director Hammond looked confused. The coordinates led here, but I don't see any. Wait, Zara interrupted, pointing to her specialized camera. Look at this. She turned the screen for everyone to see. Through the thermal imaging camera, what was invisible to the naked eye became startlingly clear. Thousands of Azurian butterflies hovered throughout the clearing, their wings creating patterns of movement that formed clear, unmistakable shapes, coordinates, dates, and what appeared to be a timeline of their presence in this exact location. This is impossible, Dr. Sylvia whispered, her face paling. Not impossible, I said, speaking at last. Just science you tried to erase. Terrence Mitchell pushed forward to look at the camera. This proves nothing. Those could be any species of butterfly. Ming stepped forward, pulling a specimen collection kit from her backpack. We can verify the species right here, Mr. Mitchell. As if on cue, a single butterfly descended from the canopy, its blue wings catching the sunlight. It hovered near Ming, who gently captured it in a clear viewing container. Azurian butterfly, she confirmed, holding up the container for all to see. Note the distinctive wing pattern and coloration. Critically endangered, with fewer than 5,000 estimated specimens remaining in the wild. Dr. Sylvia's composure cracked. This is a setup. Nadia must have released these butterflies here. Check her equipment. She's manipulating this somehow. Director Hammond turned to me with a questioning look. The butterflies have always been here, I said calmly. My research proved it months ago. I've tracked their migration patterns for 3 seasons. This is their breeding ground. Then why did your own research get discontinued? Terrence demanded. I met Dr. Sylvia's gaze. Ask her. Ask her about the consulting fees she's been receiving from Emerald Horizons while supposedly conducting independent environmental assessments. Hammond's expression hardened. Is this true, Doctor? Before she could answer, More EPA officials emerged from the tree line, carrying specialized equipment. "Director," one called out, "we're picking up signals from hundreds of electronic devices in this clearing. Some kind of miniature trackers." "Trackers I designed," I explained, "attached to Azurian butterflies throughout the past 8 months. Each one logs location data, temperature, and movement patterns. Data that proves these butterflies have been using this breeding ground for at least 3 consecutive seasons." Dr. Sylvia's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then looked at her husband with undisguised panic. "The Environmental Review Board just suspended all permits indefinitely," she whispered. "They're launching a full investigation into our approval process." Terrence Mitchell's face contorted with rage. "This is your fault," he hissed at me. "You've destroyed years of planning over some worthless insects." "No," I replied. "You did that when you tried to bury the truth." As Director Hammond pulled Dr. Sylvia aside for questioning, Ming approached me. "The tracking system? The patterns? How did you do it?" I watched Apollo, my first tagged butterfly, land on a nearby branch, his wings catching the morning light. "I programmed the trackers to change their emission signals when activated by the deletion sequence," I explained quietly. "Each tracker influences the butterfly's movement just slightly through minute temperature changes, not enough to harm them, but enough to create patterns when thousands move together. But your research, all that data, it's still gone, isn't it?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Is it?" As the EPA team continued their investigation in the clearing, I watched Dr. Sylvia being interviewed separately by Director Hammond. Her confident demeanor had crumbled, replaced by defensive gestures and occasional glances in my direction. Terrence Mitchell was on his phone, pacing and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "I don't care what it costs. Find a way to salvage this," he snapped before ending the call and approaching me. "Name your price," he said without preamble. I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? Everyone has a number." His voice dropped lower. "The resort represents $100 million investment. We can make arrangements that benefit everyone." "Like the arrangements you made with my former supervisor?" His jaw tightened. "Sylvia provided expert consultation based on preliminary findings. If your research contradicted those findings, perhaps we could have found a compromise, relocated the butterflies, created a sanctuary elsewhere." "Azurians can't be relocated," I said. "They navigate using electromagnetic fields specific to this river canyon. Their entire life cycle is adapted to this exact location." "And your life?" he asked, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "What's that adapted to? Teaching for $40,000 a year? Lab work with no recognition? I'm offering you a chance to actually make a difference, with resources." For a brief moment, I understood how Dr. Sylvia had fallen. The promise of influence, of impact, beyond what a researcher's salary could provide. The allure of being valued in a system that often treated scientists as expendable. "My price," I said slowly, "is the truth, nothing more." Terrence's face hardened, noble but naive. "This isn't over." He walked away just as Zara approached with her tablet. "Miss Karai, these readings are extraordinary. The butterfly population here is nearly triple what would constitute critical habitat designation. And these movement patterns, they're practically speaking to us." "That's exactly what they're doing," I said. "The trackers are programmed to influence their flight patterns in ways that create visible data, like a living graph showing their presence over time." More EPA officials arrived, setting up additional equipment around the clearing. One team was taking soil and water samples, while another documented every species of plant in the area. Ming joined us, excitement evident in her voice. They found 5 more endangered species dependent on this ecosystem, all missed in the original assessment. "This isn't just about the butterflies anymore." "It never was," I replied. "The Azurians are what ecologists call an indicator species. Their presence signals a healthy, intact ecosystem." Director Hammond returned, his expression grim but resolved. "Dr. Sylvia has been temporarily relieved of her duties pending investigation. Mr. Mitchell's company is facing multiple violations of the Environmental Protection Act." He paused, looking at me carefully. "She claims you fabricated evidence, possibly introduced butterflies to this location. Check the DNA sequencing from the wing samples," I suggested. "Multiple generations of Azurians have lived here. Their genetic markers will show adaptation to this specific microclimate, something impossible to fake." Hammond nodded. "We're already processing those tests. But there's another matter. Your terminated research. Doctor, Sylvia insists all your findings were properly reviewed and found methodologically unsound." I pulled out my phone and opened an app I hadn't shown anyone yet. About that. The app connected to a secure server where every piece of my research had been backing up automatically, every day, every observation, every data point, for 8 months. The deletion sequence you witnessed triggered a complete data transfer to secure cloud storage, I explained, handing him my phone, including recordings of every conversation in the laboratory for the past 3 months. Hammond scrolled through the files, his eyebrows rising. You recorded conversations? My tracking devices have audio capabilities for monitoring butterfly wing sounds, I clarified. They happen to be active during several interesting discussions about adjusting data to meet Emerald Horizon's needs. And this was all triggered when you deleted your research? I nodded. The same command that supposedly erased my work actually preserved and distributed it. Every research institution in the country received copies this morning, along with the environmental protection agencies in 3 states. Hammond handed my phone back, a hint of admiration in his eyes. Thorough. Science usually is, when done properly. Over the next several hours, more officials arrived. The clearing became a hub of activity as the full extent of the environmental significance became clear. By mid-afternoon, news vans had appeared at the forest edge, reporters eager to cover the story of endangered butterflies halting a major development. Dr. Sylvia refused to look at me as she was escorted to a vehicle. Terrence Mitchell remained, watching the destruction of his plans with cold fury. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, Director Hammond approached me again. We've received preliminary verification of your research from 3 independent laboratories. The genetic testing confirms these butterflies are indeed native to this specific location. I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, the vindication I'd been working toward. There's something else, Hammond continued. The International Conservation Committee is requesting your presence at their emergency session tomorrow. They're considering permanent protected status for the entire Viridia forest based on your findings. I'll be there, I promised. As the teams packed up their equipment, I walked to the river's edge, needing a moment alone. The water flowed clear and swift over smooth stones, just as it had the first day I arrived here. A flutter of blue caught my attention. Apollo, distinguishable by the crescent mark on his wing, landing on a flower near my feet. He stayed just long enough for me to admire his delicate beauty before rising again, joining hundreds of others dancing in the fading light. Ming found me there, watching the butterflies. They're saying this could be the largest protected butterfly habitat in North America, she said, sitting beside me on a fallen log. That was always the goal, I replied. Protection, not publication. Is that why you built in the backup system? You knew they might try to suppress your findings? I shook my head. Not at first. I started the automatic backups after I discovered the Azurians' breeding ground. Basic scientific practice. Protect your data. But after I found Dr. Sylvia's connection to Emerald Horizons, I created the deletion protocol. The ultimate trap, Ming said with admiration. You gave her exactly what she wanted, the appearance of compliance, while actually activating your countermeasures. The final phase activates tomorrow, I said quietly. Ming looked surprised. There's more? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a notification. I checked it and smiled. It's starting already. The notification was from a major scientific journal, an emergency publication request for my complete Azurian butterfly research. Similar requests began flooding in, from conservation organizations, universities, and government agencies worldwide. What exactly happens tomorrow? Ming asked. The International Conservation Committee meeting will be broadcast live to research institutions globally, I explained. During my presentation, the tracking system will activate its final protocol, synchronized wing movement, across all tagged butterflies. Thousands of Azurians will simultaneously display the same pattern, visible to standard cameras. No specialized equipment needed. Like a living billboard, Ming breathed. Exactly. A message no one can ignore or deny. And that's when I'll reveal the rest of what I discovered in Dr. Sylvia's files. Ming looked confused. What else is there? I pulled out a small drive from my pocket. Evidence that Emerald Horizons has been systematically falsifying environmental reports for 6 other development sites across 3 states. Emails showing Dr. Sylvia has been helping them identify which researchers might be flexible about their findings. A complete network of scientific fraud that extends to at least 4 other conservation projects. How did you get all that? When you're invisible enough, people stop hiding things from you, I said simply. Dr. Sylvia never thought I'd look at her computer. Never imagined I understood enough about corporate structures to follow the money. She saw me as just another replaceable researcher, someone who could be intimidated, bought, or discredited. The next morning, I stood before the International Conservation Committee, my research displayed on screens around the chamber. Representatives from environmental agencies worldwide watched as I presented not just my findings on the Azurian butterfly, but the complete web of corruption that had nearly destroyed their habitat. As predicted, during my presentation, news stations across the country interrupted their broadcasts to show live footage of the Viridia forest, where thousands of Azurian butterflies had formed a mesmerizing pattern visible from news helicopters, their wings creating a living map of all the threatened habitats connected to Emerald Horizons developments. Within hours, investigations were launched into all of Terence Mitchell's projects. Dr. Sylvia's academic credentials were suspended pending review. The Viridia forest was designated a protected sanctuary, with a research center to be established at its edge, a center I was invited to lead. 3 months later, I stood in that same clearing, now marked with unobtrusive observation platforms designed to minimize human impact. A group of young researchers listened attentively as I explained the Azurian's life cycle. The most important lesson isn't about butterflies, I told them, watching Apollo's descendants flutter through dappled sunlight. It's about resilience. Truth doesn't disappear when someone tries to delete it. Sometimes, it just finds new ways to take flight. As the students dispersed to begin their observations, I checked my phone. An email notification showed Dr. Sylvia had been formally stripped of her scientific credentials. Terence Mitchell's company had declared bankruptcy following multiple environmental violation fines. The system that had almost silenced me had been transformed instead. I pocketed my phone and looked up at the canopy, where blue wings caught the light like living sapphires. In the end, my revenge wasn't just exposing corruption or saving butterflies. It was creating something permanent, protected forest, scientific truth, and the knowledge that sometimes the smallest creatures make the most lasting impact. If you've enjoyed this true story of environmental justice, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more tales of courage and persistence. Have you ever stood up for what's right when everyone told you to back down? Share your experience in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the most powerful act isn't fighting the system, but changing it entirely, one small wing beat at a time. "6 minutes," Britt said, sliding a slick folder toward me across the glass table. "That's how long it took the executive committee to vote on your termination after reviewing the transition metrics." My mouth went dry. The conference room suddenly felt airless, like someone had sealed the vents. "But I'm only halfway through the knowledge transfer," I managed. Britt didn't blink. She'd worn her power suit today, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, the one she reserved for firing people. Beside her, my direct supervisor Hal studied the ceiling tiles, his wedding ring spinning nervously around his finger. "According to our analysis, the 6 junior analysts you've trained have already reached 87% efficiency against your benchmarks," Britt continued. "The remaining gaps don't justify your salary level. 3 months of 16-hour days, 3 months of explaining 10 years' worth of institutional knowledge to fresh-faced graduates who took furious notes but couldn't possibly understand the invisible network of relationships I'd built. 3 months of maintaining my own workload while essentially doing a second full-time job. You told me this was a mentorship program," I said quietly. "That we were expanding the department." Hal finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of guilt and relief. "The market's shifted, Aubrey. We had to adapt. Your termination package." Britt pushed another folder toward me. 2-month severance. Today will be your last day." The security guard waiting discreetly by the door made more sense now. I stood, smoothing my skirt with hands I refused to let tremble. "My team doesn't know? They'll be informed after you've cleared out your workspace," Britt said, already checking her watch. "We'd appreciate your discretion during the transition." 10 years. 10 years of canceled vacations and middle-of-the-night crisis calls. 10 years of being the go-to problem solver when everything fell apart. 10 years of building the very systems they now believed anyone could run. I nodded once, gathered only my personal planner, and walked out, leaving everything else behind. The guard followed at a respectful distance as I collected my coat and purse, then escorted me through the lobby I'd entered thousands of times before. Outside, Spring sunshine mocked my dazed expression. My phone buzzed. Messages from my now former team about a client issue they couldn't solve. They didn't know yet that they'd never have my guidance again. I silenced the notifications, hailed a rideshare, and directed the driver to take me home. What collapsed over the next 32 days would stun even me. If you're finding this story of workplace betrayal hits close to home, you're not alone. Corporate loyalty often flows in just one direction, doesn't it? If you're enjoying this journey of how things spectacularly unraveled, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that expose the reality behind professional facades. Drop a comment about your own workplace experiences. I read every single one. Now, let's continue with what happened after I was unceremoniously shown the door. My name is Aubrey Kane. At 38, I'd spent over a decade as the Principal Solutions Coordinator at Crawford Industries, one of the largest manufacturers of specialized industrial components in the Midwest. What that title actually meant was that I was the company's professional firefighter. I designed fixes when the impossible happened. When everyone else panicked, I stayed calm. When deadlines seemed hopeless, I found pathways forward. When major clients threatened to walk, I was the one who kept them, not through manipulation or false promises, but through a deep understanding of the intricate dance between production capabilities, client needs, and the human relationships that held everything together. Growing up as the middle child of 5 in a blue-collar family taught me early how to listen beyond words, how to negotiate between competing interests, and how to fix problems with limited resources. My father repaired historical carousel mechanisms for a living, delicate, complex systems where a single misaligned gear could cause catastrophic failures. I'd spent my childhood watching him diagnose issues that baffled other mechanics, using a combination of technical knowledge, intuition, and patience. I brought those same skills to Crawford. What others saw as chaotic emergencies, I recognized as patterns. Where others saw insurmountable obstacles, I found pressure points that could be adjusted. The day after my termination, I woke at 4:38 a.m., out of habit, the time I'd risen for years to review overnight production reports before the morning meetings. My hand reached for my phone before I remembered. It wasn't my problem anymore. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen window, watched the sky lighten. For the first time in years, I had nowhere to be. By noon, my phone had 17 missed calls from various team members and 3 voicemails from Hal, each more strained than the last. I didn't return any of them. Instead, I walked to the small park 4 blocks from my apartment and sat on a bench, watching children play with their mothers. Normal people living normal lives during daytime hours, a world I'd forgotten existed. On day 3, Zoe from my former team showed up at my apartment. I'd hired her myself 2 years ago. Brilliant, earnest, with analytical skills that reminded me of myself a decade earlier. "They didn't tell us until you were gone," she said when I opened the door. "Then they split us up and assigned each of us to one of the new people. It's chaos, Aubrey." I invited her in, but didn't offer solutions. That wasn't my role anymore. "Javier already quit," she continued, pacing my living room. "He said if the company treats its best people like this, there's no future there." "Smart man," I replied, serving tea in the ceramic mugs I'd never had time to use before. "The Richardson contract is about to implode. Nobody can find the contingency plans you always had ready. They existed, detailed scenarios for dozens of potential crisis points, stored on the company's shared drive in a folder structure I'd explained repeatedly to Hal, who had deemed it unnecessarily complex and overly cautious. "I'm sure they'll figure it out," I said. Zoe looked at me strangely. "You're different. Unemployed people often are." "No, it's more than that." She studied me. "You seem lighter, like you've set something down." I had. The crushing weight of carrying an entire company's operational success on my shoulders, a burden I hadn't recognized until it was removed. Despite the shock and betrayal, despite the financial uncertainty ahead, I felt a curious sense of freedom. I didn't tell Zoe that I'd already received 3 calls from headhunters who'd heard about my sudden availability. News traveled fast in specialized industries. I didn't tell her I'd turned down 2 interviews already, needing time to consider what I actually wanted next. After Zoe left, I opened my laptop for the first time since the termination. My personal email contained 4 messages from clients I'd worked with at Crawford. The subject lines varied, but the content was essentially the same. "What happened? Are you okay? The new team doesn't understand our needs. By the end of week 1, Crawford's stock had dropped 6%. A small industry blog published a piece noting operational disruptions following personnel changes. I read it with detached interest while sitting on my balcony, drinking afternoon tea, another new luxury. Week 2 brought rain and a text from my former assistant. Executive floor is in constant emergency meetings. Hal looks like he hasn't slept in days. I didn't respond, but found myself smiling as I prepared dinner that night, actually cooking instead of ordering delivery to eat while reviewing reports. During week 3, I began interviewing at other companies, partly out of financial necessity. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. The hiring managers would ask about my experience, then inevitably inquire, "We heard Crawford's having significant issues since your departure. What exactly did you do there?" How could I explain that what I did wasn't on any job description, that my value lay in connections and pattern recognition built over years, that I'd created systems so seamlessly functional they appeared effortless until they weren't there anymore? I solved problems, I'd answer simply. At home that evening, my doorbell rang. A delivery person handed me a heavy gift basket with a handwritten note from Tyson Richardson himself, CEO of Crawford's largest client. "Whatever they're paying you next, we'll top it. The new team doesn't understand our production needs." I set the basket aside without opening it. My phone rang 10 minutes later, Crawford's main switchboard. I let it go to voicemail. What I didn't know then was that the Richardson contract, worth nearly 30% of Crawford's annual revenue, had just issued a formal warning letter threatening to terminate their relationship within 14 days unless specific production issues were addressed immediately. The 6 junior analysts who had supposedly reached 87% efficiency against my benchmarks were drowning. 3 had already quit. The remaining 3 were working around the clock trying to untangle systems they'd been told were simple but were discovering were built on a decade of nuanced decisions and relationships. On day 29, the industry newsletter reported that Crawford had temporarily shut down its main production line due to quality control concerns, a euphemism for a catastrophic failure in the supply chain sequencing. I'd personally overseen for years. That night, as I prepared for bed after my first serious job offer from a competitor, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Arthur Crawford. Need to speak with you urgently. Name your terms." Arthur Crawford, the grandson of the founder, current CEO, and a man who had passed me in hallways for 10 years without ever learning my name. I turned my phone off without responding and slept better than I had in years. What I didn't know was that he would appear at my apartment building 3 days later at nearly midnight, desperate enough to bypass normal channels, pride abandoned along with shareholder confidence. What happened next would change everything, not just for me, but for the entire power structure I'd left behind. On the 32nd day after my termination, at 11:07 p.m., my apartment buzzer jolted me awake. I'd fallen asleep reading on the couch, another new freedom, letting my body rest when it needed to, instead of forcing it through another late night of work. The persistent buzzing continued. I checked my phone, 3 missed calls from the same unknown number that had texted me 3 days earlier. Arthur Crawford was nothing if not persistent. I pressed the intercom button. "Do you know what time it is?" "Miss Kane." His voice sounded different than the few times I'd heard him speak at company meetings, strained, lacking the easy authority of a man born into wealth and position. "Please, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." I almost refused. The thought of going back to bed, of letting him stew in consequences of his own making, was deeply appealing, but curiosity won out. 5 minutes, I said, buzzing him in. While waiting for the elevator to bring him up, I glanced at myself in the hallway mirror. Faded university sweatpants, hair piled messily on top of my head, face bare of makeup, not my carefully maintained professional appearance. Good. When I opened the door, the sight of Arthur Crawford was almost shocking. The man whose family name graced the company letterhead, whose tailored suits and manicured appearance graced industry magazines, looked diminished. His tie hung loose around his neck, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his normally perfect hair stuck up oddly on one side. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, voice low. I didn't invite him in immediately. "It's almost midnight. I know. I apologize." He shifted uncomfortably in my doorway. "May I come in, please?" I stepped aside, watching as he entered my modest apartment with the hesitant steps of someone entering unfamiliar territory. Which it was. a world away from his lakefront mansion and corner office with its sweeping views. I gestured toward my small kitchen table. No offer of refreshments. You're a difficult woman to reach, Miss Kane, he began, settling awkwardly onto one of my wooden chairs. Aubrey, I corrected. And I've been exactly where I've always been. You never tried to reach me before. His gaze dropped briefly. I deserve that. What do you want, Mr. Crawford? It's late, and I have a job interview tomorrow. His head snapped up. That's actually why I'm here. I need you to come back to Crawford. I laughed, a genuine, spontaneous laugh that seemed to startle him. You fired me 4 weeks ago. A mistake. A terrible mistake. A mistake is misplacing your keys or forgetting an appointment. Firing someone who dedicated 10 years to your company after making them train their replacements. That's a calculated decision. He leaned forward, hands clasped tightly on the table. The board recommended the restructuring based on efficiency projections from the operations team. I signed off on it without fully understanding what you actually did for us. And now we're in free fall. For the first time, real emotion cracked through his polished veneer. Richardson is threatening to pull their contract. The Milwaukee production line has been down for 3 days. 2 other major clients have already canceled orders. I waited, watching him struggle. The 6 analysts. They're bright, capable people, but they don't have whatever it is you do. Your integrative understanding. 3 quit already. The others are drowning. Hal approved this restructuring? I asked, curious about my former supervisor's role. Arthur shifted uncomfortably. He presented the plan, said your position had become redundant with the new team structure. Of course he had. Hal had been threatened by my knowledge for years, knowledge that extended beyond my official responsibilities. He'd tried repeatedly to get me to document everything I knew into systems he could control, as if a decade of relationship building and problem solving could be reduced to a procedure manual. Hal is no longer with the company, Arthur added, watching my reaction. Fired or resigned? Resigned. Yesterday, after the Richardson contract manager threatened to walk away from our 3-year renewal. I absorbed this without comment. The Richardson contract had been my baby from the beginning, a challenging client with exacting standards, but who rewarded reliability with unwavering loyalty. I'd built that relationship person by person, from the floor managers to their executive team. What exactly do you want from me? I asked finally. Come back. Help us stabilize. Name your terms. Why should I? The question seemed to surprise him. Because we need you. You didn't need me 4 weeks ago. We were wrong. I stood, walking to my window. The city lights spread out below. Thousands of windows where other lives played out. Lives untouched by Crawford Industries' impending crisis. Do you know what I did the day after I was fired? I asked, without turning. He remained silent. I went to a park in the middle of the day. I watched children play. I felt the sun on my face in daylight hours for what seemed like the first time in years. I turned back to face him. My doctor told me last year that my blood pressure was dangerously high. That was after my 3rd kidney infection from working so many hours I wouldn't take bathroom breaks during crisis calls. His expression registered genuine shock. In 10 years, I took exactly 7 vacation days. 7. I canceled my grandmother's funeral because the Westerly project was in jeopardy. I broke off an engagement because I couldn't give my relationship the time it deserved while solving everyone else's problems. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. You never asked. None of you did. You just expected me to make everything work, and I did. Until I became too expensive, compared to 6 fresh graduates you could pay entry-level salaries. He had the decency to look ashamed. When Britt and Hal told me I was being terminated, do you know what I felt underneath the shock? Relief. Like putting down a weight I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. Arthur stood slowly. I understand your anger. No, you don't, I interrupted. That's the point. You don't understand anything about me or what I did for your company. You never tried to. Then help me understand. His voice dropped, almost pleading. Please, hundreds of jobs are at stake now. That was playing dirty, and he knew it. The production line workers, the administrative staff, the warehouse teams, they weren't responsible for the executive decision that had disregarded my value. What specifically do you need? I asked finally. Relief flooded his face. The Richardson contract is the immediate crisis. We can't figure out how to meet their production requirements with the supply chain disruptions. Then there's the quality control issues on the Milwaukee line, and something about a European certification process that stalled completely. I held up my hand to stop the flood. And your solution is for me to come back and fix everything. Just like that. Yes. Whatever terms you want, name your price. I studied him, this powerful man, reduced to midnight begging in my apartment. The situation must be more desperate than even I realized. I'll need to think about it. Disappointment flickered across his face. We don't have much time. The board meets tomorrow at 4 to discuss emergency measures. Including what? He hesitated. Potential sale of divisions. Layoffs. I walked to the door, opening it. I'll call you tomorrow morning. He looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded instead, moving past me. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for the company's sake, for how you were treated. After he left, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, weighing options, considering angles. The company that had discarded me was now desperate for my return. The power dynamic had shifted completely. What exactly did I want? Not revenge, at least not the destructive kind that would hurt innocent employees. But accountability? Recognition? Yes, those I wanted. The next morning, I called Zoe. What's the real situation there? Her voice lowered to a whisper. Worse than you can imagine. They've lost access to the integrated tracking system. Nobody knows your passwords or how you built it. Richardson sent inspectors who found quality inconsistencies. The Milwaukee line had 3 emergency shutdowns this week. Everyone's panicking. After hanging up, I made another call to Tyson Richardson himself. Aubrey, he answered immediately. Tell me you're coming back to fix this mess. Not exactly, I replied, but I might have a proposition for you. At 3:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the emergency board meeting, I walked through Crawford Industries' front entrance. The security guard did a double take but waved me through. Nobody had bothered to remove my building access. In the lobby, Arthur Crawford waited anxiously, relief washing over his face when he spotted me. Thank God. The board's assembled. I cut him off. I'm not here as your employee. I'm not here as your employee. What? I handed him a thick folder. This contains my proposal. I suggest you review it with your board. His face clouded with confusion as he opened it, scanning the first page. His eyes widened, looking up at me in disbelief. This isn't possible. You can't seriously expect. The meeting starts in 10 minutes. I'll wait here for your answer. As he hurried toward the elevators, clutching my folder, I settled into one of the lobby chairs. A text message lit up my phone. Zoe, are the rumors true? Are you coming back? I smiled to myself, not responding. The board would be reading my terms right now. Arthur would be presenting them, knowing he had no choice but to accept. What I was about to create wasn't just a new position for myself. It was a complete restructuring of power, one that would ensure what happened to me would never happen to anyone else at Crawford Industries again. But first, they would need to agree to my terms, all of them. The next 30 minutes would determine not just my future, but the future of everyone who had ever been undervalued in their professional life. The elevator doors opened, and Arthur emerged, his face unreadable as he approached. The board has reviewed your proposal, he began. What he said next would change everything. The board has reviewed your proposal, he began, his expression unreadable. I remained seated, maintaining eye contact. The polished marble lobby suddenly felt like the negotiating ground it had become. Before I tell you their decision, I need to understand something, Arthur continued, lowering himself into the chair across from me. This isn't just about money for you, is it? No, I answered simply. Then what is it about? Exactly. Value, recognition, and ensuring what happened to me never happens to anyone else. He nodded slowly. Your consulting fee structure is unprecedented. So was the situation you created. The board balked at the equity percentage. I expected they would. Arthur leaned forward. They've approved a modified version, 8% equity instead of 15. The board seat in 18 months, contingent on performance metrics we'd established together. He paused. And they rejected your demand for a new department under your leadership. I stood, smoothing my blazer, the first professional clothing I'd worn in a month. Then, we don't have anything more to discuss. Good luck with your meeting. Panic flashed across his face as I turned toward the exit. Wait, please. That was just their initial response. I paused, but didn't turn back. I convinced them we need your full proposal. All of it. Now I turned, studying him. Even the oversight committee? He winced slightly. Even that, my proposal wasn't a simple employment offer. It was a complete restructuring of power at Crawford Industries. I would return not as an employee, but as an independent consultant with an equity stake, transitioning to a board position within a set time frame. I would create and lead a new integration strategy department, with authority crossing all divisions, staffed with people I chose, paid at rates I determined. Most radically, I demanded an oversight committee for all personnel decisions above a certain level, preventing exactly the kind of opaque termination process that had removed me. The committee would include representatives from multiple levels of the company, not just executives. The board authorized everything? I confirmed. Yes, Arthur replied, his expression revealing the battle it must have been, though some members threatened to resign over the Personnel Oversight Committee. Let them, I said calmly. His eyebrows rose. You really don't care if this breaks the company, do you? On the contrary, I'm saving it from itself. We returned to the executive floor together, a floor I'd rarely accessed in my previous decade at the company. As we approached the boardroom, Arthur paused. They're waiting for final confirmation. Before we go in, I need to know, are you doing this to hurt us, Aubrey? To watch us grovel before you pull the rug out? I considered his question carefully. No, I'm doing it because despite everything, I built systems I'm proud of, because hundreds of people who did nothing wrong depend on those systems working, and because if I control the terms, I can ensure proper value is recognized, not just for me, but for everyone whose contributions are invisible until they're gone. Relief softened his features. That's better than we deserve. Yes, I agreed. It is. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. 12 people in expensive suits stared at me, the woman they'd discarded without a second thought now holding their company's fate in her hands. I recognized most of them from company photos but had never met them personally. They hadn't considered me important enough to know. Miss Kane has accepted our counter-proposal, Arthur announced, taking his seat at the head of the table. A balding man halfway down the table cleared his throat, with the understanding that this arrangement is temporary until operations stabilize. No, Gregory, I corrected calmly, with the understanding that this represents a permanent restructuring of how Crawford Industries values its key personnel and institutional knowledge. His face reddened. You can't possibly. The Richardson contract renews in 11 days, I interrupted. You're currently unable to meet their quality specifications. 3 other major clients have paused orders. Your main production line has suffered multiple critical failures. Your stock has dropped 18% in a month. I smiled politely. Would you like me to continue listing the reasons why I can? In fact, possibly? The silence that followed was deafening. I'll need the agreement signed today, I continued. I start tomorrow, not as your employee, as your partner. Arthur slid papers across the table. The legal team prepared everything, per your specifications. I reviewed each page carefully, aware of the tense silence surrounding me. When satisfied, I signed with a flourish, then stood. Tomorrow morning, I'll meet with the remaining analysts to begin recovery procedures. I'll need full access reinstated to all systems immediately. I turned to Arthur, and I want Zoe promoted to Assistant Integration Director, effective immediately, with a compensation package we'll discuss privately. He nodded without hesitation. As I gathered the signed agreements, a woman near the end of the table, one of only 2 female board members, spoke up. Miss Kane, may I ask what made you agree to help us after how things ended? I considered my answer carefully, because true power isn't about destruction. It's about rebuilding on better terms. The next morning, I arrived at Crawford Industries at precisely 7:30 a.m., not as an employee rushing to solve everyone else's problems, but as a partner with clear boundaries and recognized value. The security guard greeted me with a smile and a newly printed access badge, one that opened every door in the building. In the elevator, 3 executives who had never acknowledged me before suddenly found me fascinating. We're so glad you've returned, Miss Kane, one offered nervously. I haven't returned, I corrected. I've arrived. The distinction wasn't just semantic. In my previous role, I'd been swimming upstream against organizational limitations, solving problems without the authority to prevent them. Now, I had both the responsibility and the power to implement structural changes. My first meeting was with the remaining analysts from the team that had supposedly replaced me. Their relief was palpable as I outlined our approach to stabilizing the Richardson contract. But we've tried everything, one protested. Their specifications are impossible with our current supply chain issues. Nothing's impossible, I replied, just underimagined. By noon, I had identified 3 critical failure points in the production sequencing that no one had noticed, invisible to anyone who hadn't spent years understanding the rhythms of our operations. By 3 p.m., I had drafted new protocols that accounted for supply chain realities while meeting Richardson's quality requirements. Tyson Richardson himself called me directly when he received my proposal. "You did in 6 hours what they couldn't do in a month," he marveled. "That's why you'll be dealing exclusively with me from now on," I replied, "and why our new contract will include different terms." "Name them," he said without hesitation. 2 days later, I presented the board with a renewed Richardson contract with better terms for Crawford Industries than they'd had in years. Their stunned expressions were worth every minute of the intense negotiations. "How did you get Richardson to agree to these pricing adjustments?" Gregory asked, bewildered. "By understanding what they actually value versus what you thought they valued," I answered simply. Within 2 weeks, all critical operations had stabilized. Within a month, the stock had recovered its losses. Within 3 months, my new integration strategy department had transformed how information flowed through the company, breaking down silos that had caused costly redundancies for years. Most importantly, the Personnel Oversight Committee, now formalized in company bylaws, had already prevented 2 ill-considered terminations proposed by executives who couldn't see beyond spreadsheets to the human value involved. 6 months after my midnight conversation with Arthur Crawford, I sat across from him in what had once been a monthly formality but was now a genuine strategic partnership. "The board vote for your seat is next week," he mentioned. "It's going to be unanimous." I smiled. "Even Gregory?" "Especially Gregory. Since you fixed the European certification process, he's become your biggest supporter." I leaned back in my chair. "It was never about having a seat at the table, Arthur. It was about changing the table itself." "Well, you've certainly done that," he acknowledged. "Crawford Industries hasn't operated this efficiently in its entire history." What neither of us said aloud, though we both understood, was that my greatest revenge wasn't in humbling those who had undervalued me. It was in creating a system where value was recognized before it was lost, where institutional knowledge was respected as the asset it truly was, and where no one person could discard another without proper consideration of all they brought to the table. I hadn't just saved Crawford Industries. I'd transformed it into what it should have been all along. The true revenge wasn't in destruction. It was in reconstruction that made the old power structures obsolete. As I left Arthur's office that day, I passed the workspace where 3 new analysts were being trained by Zoe, now Director of Integration Development with her own equity package. They weren't just learning procedures. They were learning the why behind the how, understanding the relationships that made everything work. "You've built something remarkable here," Zoe said as we walked to the elevator together. "No," I corrected her with a smile. "We're building it, and this time, everyone knows exactly what it's worth." Thanks for staying with me through Aubrey's journey from undervalued employee to powerful changemaker. If her story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your workplace until something fell apart without you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about turning professional setbacks into opportunities. Have you ever been underestimated at work only to prove your worth later? Share your experience in the comments. I love hearing how others have navigated these challenging situations. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't walking away. It's walking back in through the front door on your own terms. 9 reports due every Wednesday, 16 on Friday, I said, pointing at a spreadsheet cell. This formula balances the workload projection, but it's never accurate because it doesn't account for the supplemental data from operations. Adira nodded eagerly, scribbling in her notebook. Her enthusiasm was exhausting after 13 days of this charade. Her sleek blazer still had its tags tucked inside. I'd spotted them yesterday, when she took it off during lunch. "What about the workflow approvals?" she asked. "Do they all go through Renner?" "Only customer-facing ones." I clicked through to another screen. "Internal reports go to Vance, except during quarter end, when everything gets rerouted to the leadership team." Adira's brow furrowed. That wasn't in any of the training materials. It wouldn't be. I forced a pleasant smile. The system was designed 5 years ago for a team of 3. They never updated the protocols when positions were consolidated. My desk was nearly empty now. Personal items packed in a cardboard box by my feet. Just some corporate pens and a company mug remained. 5 years of 70-hour weeks reduced to trash and a single box. I'll be right back, I said, standing up. Last meeting with Weston. You can practice those export sequences while I'm gone. Adira nodded, already clicking through menus. 23 years old, with a brand new business degree, and the misfortune of being hired into this meat grinder. When I returned 15 minutes later, something had changed. Adira's face was ashen, her notebook abandoned. On my monitor was an open file I recognized immediately. Position, requirements, complete, PDF. I was looking for the export template, she whispered. I clicked the wrong folder. I thought it might help me understand. The 17-page document detailed everything. All 3 roles I'd been performing simultaneously. The executive support functions, the technical troubleshooting, the client management protocols, the deadline matrices, the reporting hierarchies, the quarterly presentations, the cross-departmental analyses. This can't be right, Adira said, voice cracking. They told me this was entry level. They're paying me $42,000. Her eyes found mine, searching. How much were they paying you to do all this? 58 after 5 years, I answered flatly. She shook her head in disbelief. That's impossible. No one can do all this. I thought I was just learning your job, not replacing an entire department. Now you understand. I picked up my box. Good luck, Adira. Wait, you can't just… What am I supposed to? Panic overtook her features. They'll fire me when I can't do this. I paused at the door, sympathy and bitterness warring inside me. That's not my problem anymore. Before we continue further, thank you for listening to this story. If you're enjoying it, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything, and there's much more to this revenge tale that you won't want to miss. My name is Lavana, and until 3 weeks ago, I was the Administrative Solutions Specialist at a mid-sized company selling industrial equipment. That impressive title translated to being the behind-the-scenes Atlas, holding an entire division on my shoulders. I didn't start out that way. 5 years earlier, I'd been hired as a coordinator, basic data entry, scheduling, and support. Within 6 months, my boss Weston began adding temporary responsibilities. Another department lost headcount. Could I help with their weekly reports? A senior analyst left. Could I maintain their client database? A director needed presentation support. Could I just handle that small task? Each request came with the same hollow promise. We'll revisit your compensation at your review. Each review came with the same excuse. Budget constraints this quarter. Each year, my workload doubled, while my title and salary barely moved. By year 3, I was secretly running operations for 3 different teams. The directors, Weston, Renner, and Vance, all took credit for my work in executive meetings. They'd forward my analyses with their names attached. They'd present my slides without acknowledgement. I developed stomach ulcers. My hair started falling out in clumps. I lost 20 pounds without trying. My mother didn't recognize me when I finally visited home last Christmas. Lavana, she'd said, touching my hollowed cheek. What are they doing to you at that place? That question haunted me for months until I finally gathered the courage to request a meeting with Weston and HR last month. I came prepared. A detailed breakdown of my actual duties versus my job description, market rates for each function I performed, documented overtime hours, and specific instances where my work had directly saved or made the company money. Weston leaned back in his chair, barely glancing at my materials. You know budgets are tight right now, Lavana. We simply don't have the resources to adjust compensation mid-year. I'm doing the work of 3 positions, I said, my voice shakier than I'd intended. I just need fair compensation. We appreciate your dedication, the HR representative said with practiced sympathy. But your position is classified at its appropriate level. Then reclassify it, I pushed. Or split the responsibilities appropriately. Weston's expression hardened. If the current arrangement isn't working for you, perhaps we should discuss alternatives. 3 days later, they announced a reorganization. My position would be eliminated, but they'd generously allow me to train my replacement before my departure. with 2 weeks severance. When Adira arrived, bright-eyed and clutching her leather portfolio, Weston had smirked. Just show her the basics. 2 weeks should be enough. Translation: don't let her know what she's really in for. Keep her blind until I'm gone. For 13 days, I did as instructed. I showed Adira the surface-level processes, introduced her around, demonstrated the basic functions of our systems. I didn't mention the executive who'd scream if reports weren't on his desk by 7:30 a.m. sharp. I didn't explain how to handle the client who demanded custom analytics every Tuesday, but refused to provide the necessary data until Monday evening. I didn't warn her about the regional managers who fought like territorial wolves over resources. I told myself it wasn't my problem. The company had discarded me like worn equipment. Why should I care what happened next? Then came day 14, and Adira found the complete requirements document I'd created months ago in a desperate attempt to prove my workload was unsustainable. Now she knew, and I still walked away. My phone rang at 8:42 p.m. that same evening. Lavana? Adira's voice was tight with stress. I'm still at the office. Vance is asking for an operations summary I know nothing about. And Renner just emailed about missing client reports. I let it go to voicemail. 4 more calls came through before midnight. 6 text messages the next day. 3 emails with increasingly desperate subject lines. Urgent. Need help with monthly close. Then, please. About to miss critical deadline. And finally, they're going to fire me. I deleted them all. By the end of week 3, my apartment had become a sanctuary of silence. No alarm clock, no late-night emails, no weekend emergency calls. I slept for 14 hours straight the first Saturday. On Sunday, I actually finished a novel I'd started 2 years ago. My phone lit up with an unfamiliar number on Monday morning. Is this Lavana? A deep voice I recognized as Kylan, the regional director. Yes, we need to talk. The Westridge account is threatening to walk. None of the reports are accurate. The presentations are missing crucial data. And frankly, the whole operation is falling apart. I said nothing. We'd like you to come back, just temporarily, as a consultant, to help. Smooth things over. Name your price. The silence stretched across the phone line as I considered Kylan's desperate request. 5 years of being undervalued, overlooked and overworked. Now they needed me. My consulting rate is $225 per hour, I said finally, with a guaranteed minimum of 30 hours weekly for 6 months. I work remotely except for client meetings, which will be scheduled during business hours only. I'll need written confirmation before I start. That's Kylan began, clearly calculating. That would be triple my former salary. Non-negotiable, I interrupted. And I'll need complete autonomy over my schedule and processes. Another pause. Fine. When can you start? I'll need the contract by tomorrow morning. I'll begin the day after it's signed. 48 hours later, I walked back through the office doors, not as the desperate employee who'd left with a cardboard box, but as an external consultant with leverage. Heads turned as I passed. Whispers followed. I had my hair styled that morning, wore a tailored suit I'd saved for months to buy, and carried a sleek leather portfolio instead of the company-issued notebook. I spotted Adira immediately. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her once pristine blazer was wrinkled at the elbows. When she saw me, her expression crumpled between relief and resentment. You're back, she said, voice hollow. Are you taking your job back? No, I replied, setting my bag on the conference room table. I'm here to fix the systems, not reclaim my position. Her eyes welled with tears. They're going to fire me. I've missed 3 major deadlines already. Renner called me incompetent in front of the entire team yesterday. I studied her, seeing myself 3 years ago, before the ulcers, before I'd learned that dedication meant nothing to people like Weston. Let's talk, I said, gesturing to the chair beside me. I'm not here to replace you or save you, but I will show you exactly what's happening and how to navigate it. For the next hour, I explained the reality she'd stumbled into, how the executives had systematically combined multiple roles while eliminating positions, how they took credit for work they didn't do, how they deliberately set impossible expectations to keep employees desperate for approval. But why help me now? Adira asked. You just walked away before. Because my goal isn't to punish you, I said. It's to make visible what they've been hiding. My first week back was strategic reconnaissance. I requested access to all systems, access they couldn't deny given the crisis with their accounts. I scanned emails, documentation, projection reports. I uncovered how thoroughly they'd erased evidence of my contributions over the years, replacing my name with theirs on every report and presentation. During client calls, I carefully noted how Weston and Renner blamed staffing transitions for the failures that were actually caused by their own refusal to properly staff the department. They'd promised improvements once the new team member gets up to speed, placing all responsibility on Adira's shoulders. By week 3, I began implementing my true plan. I created comprehensive process documentation, not just instructions, but with timestamps, effort estimates, and dependency maps that made the workflow visible. I built training modules that explicitly outlined which tasks belonged to which roles in a properly functioning department. When Vance asked me to finish a quarterly analysis, I explained that it would require 43 hours to complete properly, by design, impossible for one person to manage alongside regular duties. "That's ridiculous," he scoffed. "You used to get these done all the time." "Yes," I agreed calmly, "by working until 2 a.m. for a week straight, which is why my consulting agreement specifically prohibits that now." His face reddened. "Then, what do you suggest?" "Divide the analysis components appropriately among 3 people, as the process was originally designed. By month 2, I'd mapped every broken process in the department. I'd documented every impossible expectation. More importantly, I'd begun properly training Adira, not as my replacement, but as someone who understood exactly what was reasonable to expect from her role. "They're still pushing me to do everything," she confided during our weekly check-in. "But now I can push back with actual data. According to the process documentation, this requires director approval before I can proceed. It's like having armor." I nodded. "Document everything. Track your hours against the established benchmarks. When they ask for impossible things, respond in writing." The executives grew increasingly uncomfortable with my presence. I'd catch Weston watching me with narrow eyes when I presented unbundled workflow diagrams to the team. Renner stopped making direct requests and began routing everything through project management tools where his demands would be time-stamped and visible. Halfway through my contract, the regional director, Kylan, called me into his office. "The documentation you're creating is extensive," he said carefully. "It's what you hired me to do," I replied. "Stabilize the processes." "Yes, but there seems to be an emphasis on separating functions that we've traditionally had one person handle." I smiled. "You mean functions you've traditionally had me handle?" He shifted uncomfortably. "The budget doesn't support adding headcount." "Then the budget doesn't support the workload," I countered. "You have 3 options: reduce the deliverables, increase the resources, or continue watching clients walk away when deadlines are missed." That meeting initiated a power struggle that defined the next 3 months. The executives tried repeatedly to pull me back into directly doing the work. Rather than systematizing it, I refused each time, citing my contract terms. They tried reducing my hours. I reminded them of the guaranteed minimum. They suggested I train Adira to handle everything like you used to. I provided documented evidence of why that was impossible. Meanwhile, Adira was transforming. The nervous new hire became increasingly confident as she mastered the reasonable portions of her role. She began advocating for herself in meetings, armed with the process documentation I'd created. According to the workflow analysis, she would say when Vance tried dumping additional projects on her, "This requires technical expertise from the operations team." Other employees began noticing. They'd approach me cautiously at first, then with increasing boldness. "Could you document our department's processes next? Is it true that my job description only covers half of what I'm actually doing? Can you explain how to push back when they ask for impossible timelines?" A subtle shift was occurring throughout the office, a quiet revolution of boundaries and documentation that made visible what the company had deliberately obscured for years. By month 5, the crisis point arrived. 2 more major clients threatened to leave after receiving incomplete deliverables. The quarterly projections showed alarming shortfalls. The regional headquarters began asking pointed questions about department performance. Kylan called an emergency meeting with the executive team. I was invited as the external consultant. "We need solutions," he announced, face grim. "Not excuses." Weston immediately turned to me. "Your documentation protocols are slowing everything down. People are refusing tasks because they're not in their job description." I opened my laptop. "Actually, I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of the department's challenges and 3 potential solutions." The projector illuminated with my presentation, months of meticulous data collection, displayed in stark, undeniable graphs. Option 1, I began, clicking to the first slide, requires restructuring the department to properly staff all functions currently being performed. Based on workload analysis, this means adding 3 full-time positions. Renner scoffed. Impossible with current budgets. Option 2, I continued without acknowledging him, involves eliminating approximately 40% of current deliverables to match existing staffing levels. Our clients would never accept that, Vance interjected. Option 3 is continuing as you are now, understaffing critical functions while demanding impossible output. My analysis shows this will result in losing approximately 30% of your client base within 6 months as service quality continues to deteriorate. The room fell silent as they stared at the projected losses on the screen. Kylan leaned forward. These numbers can't be right. Every calculation is documented in the appendix, I replied, including 5 years of data showing how consolidating positions has directly correlated with declining client satisfaction and increasing error rates. The tension in the room was thick enough to touch. My heart pounded, but my voice remained steady. This was what I'd been working towards since the day they'd asked me to train my replacement. For several moments, no one spoke. Weston's face had drained of color. Renner straightened his tie repeatedly. Vance stared at the ceiling as if answers might materialize there. Kylan finally broke the silence. We need time to review these findings. My contract ends in 3 weeks, I replied. The complete analysis will be submitted then. As I gathered my materials, Weston leaned over. What exactly are you trying to accomplish here? He hissed, low enough that only I could hear. I met his eyes directly. Transparency. The next morning, Adira texted me. Emergency DEPT meeting called. All staff required. 10 a.m. conference room. I arrived precisely on time, choosing a seat near the back. The room was packed, not just with our department, but representatives from every division. The tension was palpable as Kylan entered, followed by someone I didn't recognize. A sharp-featured woman in an immaculate suit who surveyed the room with clinical detachment. This is Thalia from regional headquarters, Kylan announced without preamble. She'll be conducting a comprehensive departmental audit over the next 2 weeks. Weston's smile looked physically painful. We welcome the opportunity to showcase our operational efficiencies. Thalia's expression remained neutral. I've reviewed the preliminary findings from your consultant. She nodded toward me. They've raised significant concerns at the executive level. For the next 2 hours, Thalia methodically outlined the audit process. Every employee would document their actual daily tasks versus their job description. All workflows would be mapped. All overtime would be tracked. All client complaints would be reviewed. As the meeting concluded, Renner intercepted me in the hallway. You've made a serious mistake, he said, voice low and dangerous. When this audit concludes, they'll see we've been running a lean, efficient operation. Your contract won't be renewed, and I'll personally ensure you never work in this industry again. I welcome their scrutiny, I replied calmly. In fact, I've prepared 5 years of my own documentation to assist their investigation. His confident expression faltered. What documentation? Everything, Renner. Every after-hours email. Every directive to complete impossible tasks. Every instance where my work was presented as yours. Every denied request for proper staffing or compensation. I watched realization dawn slowly across his face. You were planning this all along. No, I corrected him. You planned it when you decided one person should do the work of 3 for the salary of half. The following days brought a flurry of activity. Thalia's audit team set up in the conference room, interviewing employees one by one. I provided them with my comprehensive analysis, including historical data I'd been quietly archiving for years. Adira emerged from her interview looking stunned. They asked me to compare my actual workload to what I was told during hiring, she whispered. When I showed them the real position requirements document, the auditor literally stopped taking notes and just stared. By week 2, the executives rarely appeared in the office. Closed-door meetings at regional headquarters became the norm. Rumors circulated, budgets being re-examined, organizational charts being redrawn. On day 12 of the audit, my phone rang at 6:30 a.m. Lavana? It was Thalia. We need you at headquarters. 9 o'clock. The regional office occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown high-rise. I was escorted to a spacious conference room, where Thalia waited alongside three people I recognized as higher-level executives from company photos. "Thank you for coming," said an older man who introduced himself as Barrett, the divisional president. "We've completed our preliminary audit findings." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a document titled Organizational Restructuring Proposal. I skimmed it, my heart accelerating with each paragraph. "You're implementing option 1, I said, looking up. 3 additional positions." Thalia nodded. "Your analysis was conservative. If anything, we identified 5 roles that had been improperly consolidated." She paused. "We've also discovered concerning patterns in how executives have been claiming credit for work they didn't perform. The purpose of this meeting," Barrett continued, "is twofold. First, to inform you that Weston, Renner, and Vance are being placed on administrative leave pending further investigation." I maintained my neutral expression despite the surge of vindication I felt. "Second," he continued, "to offer you a position." He outlined their proposal: Director of Operational Excellence, reporting directly to regional leadership. Salary more than double what I'd been making before. Full authority to implement the systems I'd been documenting. A team of my own. "Why me?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I'm the one who exposed the problems." "Precisely," Barrett replied. "You identified systemic failures others either couldn't see or chose to ignore. You documented solutions rather than just complaints. And despite having every reason to simply walk away, you created a framework that will benefit the entire organization." I considered for a long moment before responding. "I'll need complete transparency in all communications, written confirmation of my authority to implement changes, and Adira gets promoted to team lead with appropriate compensation adjustment." Barrett smiled slightly. "Already done." She impressed the audit team considerably. 2 days later, I stood before the assembled department staff. The news of the executive's administrative leave had spread quickly. Faces looked up at me with mixtures of hope, wariness, and curiosity. "I'll be brief," I began. "The audit revealed what many of you already knew. This department has been systematically understaffed, while expectations continued to increase. That changes today." I outlined the restructuring plan, the new positions being created, the revised reporting structures. With each point, I saw shoulders relax, expressions lighten. "Adira will be taking over as operations team lead," I announced, gesturing to her. The surprise on her face was genuine. I'd been instructed not to tell her before the announcement. After addressing questions, I returned to what was now my office. As I organized my new workspace, Adira appeared in the doorway. "You planned this from the beginning," she said. "Not a question, but a realization. When you walked out that day, when you ignored my calls, when you came back as a consultant, this was always your endgame." I considered her words carefully. "Not exactly. When I left, I just wanted to escape. When I ignored your calls, I was protecting myself from being pulled back in. But when they asked me to return as a consultant, I paused. That's when I saw the opportunity to force them to face reality. By documenting everything they'd hidden," she finished. "The thing about people who take advantage of others," I said, "is that they rely on silence and isolation. They count on you feeling too overwhelmed to keep records, too desperate to speak up, too afraid to draw boundaries. So, your revenge was creating a paper trail?" I smiled. "My revenge was forcing transparency. The executives built their careers on taking credit for others' work, while deliberately understaffing departments. They hid the true workload from new hires like you. They counted on people burning out and leaving before they could cause problems. But you didn't leave," Adira said. "Not really." "No," I agreed. I came back stronger. That afternoon, I received an email from Thalia. The investigation had expanded to other departments. Similar patterns had been identified. Company-wide restructuring was being implemented. Attached was a copy of Weston's termination letter. 6 months later, our department ran smoothly, with proper staffing and clear boundaries. Adira thrived in her leadership role. The client retention rate climbed steadily,